Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to look at three group stories. And this is the first time we run into a conversation about Mark and how he lays things out. From our conversations in the past, you remember Mark is the shortest gospel, and so when Mark writes, if he has the choice between making the story longer or shorter, which one does Mark choose? Short. He's not as much interested in the details as the point. Okay. Secondly, this is the first time in our discussion we're finally landing in a place where we talked about this as well. Mark is not as obsessed by telling a story in order. This is one of the things that in my family is a unique kind of conversation. I tend to think that the reason I do this is because I'm such an intelligent person that I think faster than I speak. And my wife has a different opinion. Heidi can ask me what happened in the day, and I will start talking in the morning, but then I'll leap to the afternoon, but then I'll come back to the morning. I will tell things in a circuitous route that has nothing to do with chronological progression. Carly is in this class. Carly works with me on a daily basis. Carly and Anna, who's worked with me, know when I start talking, how it happened in history is not as important to me as in my mind I organize things thematically or when I finally remember them. So it's sort of this kind of piece. Mark does the same thing. Now, if you and Mark are just around to have a conversation, you could say that the reason Mark puts this story here is because it reminded him of another story. Often you'll have a conversation with me and I'll be talking and I'll say, in just a moment, remind me to tell you about this. It's because this has triggered a thought or a memory for me. But Mark wasn't having a conversation. He was writing down his stories. Okay? So this means Mark purposely chose to take something that might have happened in the second year of Jesus' ministry and put it side by side with something in his first year of ministry. They're not chronologically happening, so why would he choose to do that? What would be some of the reasons Mark might think about doing it?
Important points.
Do what?
Important points.
Important points.
Thematically similar.
They're similar in story.
Collecting evidence for a conclusion?
Evidence for a bigger point, and so sometimes that's really important for us to figure out when we're studying this. It's almost like if you go back in time, some of you shorter time than others, when you were in high school or college and you were building, they taught you how to write an essay. You'd have a topic, sentence, or claim, and then they'd have a supporting evidence 1, supporting evidence 2, supporting evidence 3. Which is more important, the supporting evidence or the big idea? The big idea. And if you get bogged down in one of the supporting evidence issues, you can actually reach the wrong conclusion. Because you think it's about this instead of about this. Are you with me so far? I think this is what Mark does. Mark has 3 stories here, and they're all back to back in the storyline. They may have happened chronologically, but it doesn't appear that they did. So what our task is tonight is to look at the 3 stories and then see if we can come up with what the big idea is. So there are 3.2 tables back here, and they're in right now. We have the people who've come sit up here, and then we have the unclean in the back. So there we go. Look at them, they're waving. I love Betty Rogers and Wilma, but depending on the day, I love one of them more than the other. So, Mark chapter 2.
I choose not to be a victim.
Absolutely. Amen. So be it. Make it so. Let it be. Mark chapter 2. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do table up front. You get the first set, verses 13 through 17. Okay? Table number 2, you get verses 18 through 22. And then table 3, the back tables, and the point 2 in the back, you get 23 through 28. Okay? Here are the 2 questions I want you to discuss after reading the passage. 2 questions. Question number 1. What did Jesus get in trouble for? He got in trouble in each one of these stories. So what did he get in trouble for? Spend about 5 minutes discussing that, and then I'll transition you and I'll lead you to go to the second question, okay? So work on question number 1. On mark, get set, go.
What was the question?
What did Jesus get in trouble for?
Why are you asking me?
He's eating with bad people. Sinners.
Hanging out with sinners.
Yeah.
Yeah, simple answer. Eat with tax collectors and sinners.
Or is it he didn't invite the right people?
Everyone was invited. He didn't go to the correct person's house.
He didn't invite the Pharisees.
Into the tax collector's dinner.
I feel like I should clarify. I am not abusing my children with a Nerf gun. He did not hear part of that. I'm shooting at their feet or at the wall above their head to get their attention.
Is it the wall above their head just because you can't aim?
No, I intentionally will not hit them.
You intentionally shoot across their bow. It's a strategic
Intentionally
war.
shoot in their direction,
Because
but
they ignore my
generally
voice
missing them all
when
the
I
time.
say clean up. But if I shoot the Nerf gun at the wall above their head, they jump and start cleaning.
That
60
is
seconds.
classic conditioning. You are doing well.
It's like a clicker for a dog.
If you get shot at, clean your room.
See, you are applying educational psychology. This is what you went to college.
We were worrying. with our
Pavlonian
children.
response.
We are worrying with our children sometimes.
Wow.
I've said several times I wish we could get a shot collar.
No, Levi doesn't shut up. He will not shut up.
That's not what the story's about.
Jesus got in trouble because he was hanging out with sinners.
Is that all we're talking about?
Yes.
You want 5 minutes on this, Pastor Randy? Oh, we're good. We're comparing Carrie's children to dogs now because we're nice like that.
Oh, I thought about this like
Pablo said
last
what?
couple of days.
Pavlov.
Like, you know how Paul said something else to another group of people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about this. Wasn't the other group of people like Romans or like fresh Christians?
I'm not sure.
Would
Draw
that
my
make
memory.
the audience make a difference?
The audience always makes a difference, but I
Yeah.
don't know where we're.
Like
I-
Jesus is saying, like I'm gonna sit with sinners, and Paul was like, no, don't have nothing to do with them.
Okay.
So
I'm with him.
people who are more fresh. are
Who Paul was
more
talking to
easily
mattered.
influenced. That's what I was thinking.
You
Absolutely.
tell baby Christians
But
stay
that's
away
all-
from sinners.
That's all my thought.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it the last couple of days.
Well, it's like I told her when we were walking out of the building that, yes, you can go into that environment that is a negative influence for you and you can be successful. Not by yourself, but with the power of Jesus on your side.
Yeah,
We need Jesus to be successful. Jesus is Jesus.
yeah,
He can be successful in that environment.
yeah.
He has the power of Jesus to be successful. So, yes, he can. We shouldn't. I
Yeah.
don't really see that as being conflict.
Accountability and
Yeah.
a purposeful goal.
But I just thought it was a good thought.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought it up. So did we move on to? Oh, y'all are already done with the next two.
This is not my phone. Sorry.
You're already done.
So what was the question?
What did Jesus get in trouble for?
Oh.
The question is, how deep or shallow do we go with this? What did the Pharisees say, or what was the underlying truth of the matter?
Both.
Well, the Pharisees were jealous, partly.
Yeah,
I would say.
he was eating with the wrong people. They were the elite. They were the ones doing it right. They were the ones that the Messiah was supposed to
Yeah.
associate with.
Yeah.
Well, and an
That may
aspect of
also mean that
cleanness,
they were
too.
proud.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I don't think they really
think they-
wanted him to hang out with them.
No, I think it would have been more of an issue of like eating with unsavory people. You know, you weren't supposed to eat with non-Jews anyway, but then sort of sinners and tax
There was-
collectors, there's a cleanness issue.
There was like, what was it, a day-long ritual of cleansing yourself from
Right.
washing and
Right.
waiting.
Right. And like the gleaning has to do with working on the Sabbath. So, yeah, right.
That one doesn't work out too well.
And then not fasting. I don't know.
Okay, so here's the next question. Since you got quiet, I'm assuming you got that. What was Jesus' response? Okay, so what he got in trouble for, and who is it that Jesus ticked off in that story? So, who got upset with Jesus, and what was his response? I'll give you 5 minutes on that one.
No, here it was the Pharisees.
And he just told him off.
Yep.
I'm sorry. The question is, who is mad at Jesus? We said, what did Jesus do to get in trouble? So who is it that was upset? And secondly, what was Jesus' response to that person? Okay, or people?
Words.
Who was asking them about
Colorado River. The Colorado River. That's what his response was.
His response was in words. It's
It's a long story. Got it. Got it.
We got time.
On one of his, he is classic guy won't expand on things, but like sometimes he can take it to an extreme and be very short in answers. So one time on a test, he was asked, how was the Grand Canyon formed? You know, as an educator, the teacher is asking for erosion, what's erosion, how that worked, that it was the Colorado River, and he wrote blah, 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 blah. He wrote Colorado River and got it wrong and didn't understand why.
correct answer.
Because it is technically the correct answer. It's
probably
just
would have
certainly not.
But there were effects
It
that
was
will cause
I was
bias.
totally the teacher that would read into things and go, yeah, I totally know where you're going with
Yeah,
this."
I would have been like, okay.
But at the same time, do you know that it was because of erosion, or did the Colorado River just like dump itself there and make a big hole when it, hit the ground?
Had a bunch of little people
Just like-
chiseling outside.
That's right.
Well, it was the question. It was like the essay question at the end of the test, and so like you already
essay.
answered all the questions about erosion.
Yeah.
And it's essay, yeah.
And so now you're required to put it all in paragraph form.
Did you argue?
Huh?
Did you argue on it? No. Okay. That's funny.
It's just one of those running things at the hat with
Yes,
his
and now
parents that
words.
are.
That's what he responded with. That's funny.
Didn't answer the question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Is there any more sushi left?
Check.
It's like,
I see the container and I see something in
they
it.
wanted a yes or no answer to point me on that.
All right, you guys were fast. So let's do
So what do we
the
got?
first one since you guys have done this before. It's pretty simple. Well, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to the kind of conclusions for each one of them. We're going to put them together for each paragraph and then we're going to build it. So the first one, this is the story we talked about last week. Jesus and Levi and his friends. What did Jesus get in trouble for?
Eating with sinners.
Eating with sinners. Who was mad at him?
Pharisees.
Pharisees. What was Jesus' response? He spoke the truth, and what did he say to them? I've come for what?
The sick.
I've come for the sick. Okay? Verses 18 through 22. This is the discussion with John's disciples and Pharisees, etc., etc. So now we got a little bit of a shift here. Pharisees in the stories, good guys or bad guys usually? Bad guys. Now we go to verse 18, important piece. We have the Pharisees, bad guys, and then we have John's disciples. Is John a good guy or a bad guy?
Good guy.
He's a good guy. All right. So what did Jesus get in trouble for in the second group of verses?
Not fasting.
Disciples weren't fasting. Okay. We just acknowledged who was upset. Pharisees and who else? Some people. This is, see, I set you up for failure. Who are the people? It's some people. So we really don't know who the people are upset, do we? Who could we infer is upset though?
Pharisees.
Pharisees. And who else?
John's disciples.
John's disciples. And so, let's take this for a second. I told you who was upset with Jesus or what did Jesus get in trouble for. Let's look at that question again for this moment. Did Jesus get in trouble in this section? Implied. Who are they really asking questions about?
Jesus' disciples.
The disciples.
Why weren't they instructed to do it?
And the question is, why weren't they instructed to do it? What's going on? What are these people doing? And so is this really a matter of correction? Or is this a matter of confusion? Well, why so?
Because they're asking the question, some people are fasting and you people are not. Why?
Okay. So what was Jesus' response?
Give them a parable.
He gave him a parable. And is his answer helpful or more confusing? To them and maybe to you too, right? Because so the answer to is Jesus in trouble was a corrective teaching in the first one, right? Why you eat with sinners? Because I came for the sick. The confusion, Jesus gave them more things to think about. Okay? Come along. Third one. What did Jesus get in trouble for? Speaking the truth, but what was the action? Working on a Sabbath. And again, who's upset? Pharisees. And again, is it Jesus who's in trouble or is it someone else? It's the who? Disciples are the ones who are working on the Sabbath. Right? What is Jesus' response? Sabbath was for man. not man for the Sabbath. But he also does something else. What else does Jesus do in this paragraph? He asked about David. So he did, you could actually say he told a story. And where was that story from?
OT.
The Old Testament, which at this point is defined as it's not called the Old Testament.
The law.
It's their Bible. Okay? It's their guiding document. So I would say it this way. Jesus brings some clarity to their misunderstanding. Okay? So the first one he's correcting, and the second one he's sort of fostering some more confusion, and this third one he's bringing clarity. Do you think the Pharisees would have agreed with him on the Sabbath is made for man, not the man made for the Sabbath?
No.
What do you think?
If they thought about it, they would have.
If they'd have thought about it, they would have. But did they?
No, legally not.
They're tradition. So we're going to jump afield a little bit. We're going to jump out of the text. Based on some of the stuff we've talked about in here, as well as what you've learned for other parts of your study of the Bible, Pharisees were good at making what? Laws or
Stricter rules.
Cool. And so I said, what was the Old Testament actually called? I said Bible, but one of you said it was called the what?
The law.
The law. So Pharisees have the law. And remember, what did they do to make sure you didn't break the law? They gave you what?
Stricter rules.
Stricter rules. So they made more rules so that you wouldn't break the law. This is, the best way to explain it this way is, there are some cars coming out with all the technology that you can use your phone for my teenager, and I can set that that vehicle can never go over 65 miles per hour. Okay? You can set that piece. Because it's called a what? You guys know what the term is? It's a governor. It means the engine has the capability to go 100 miles an hour, but I'm going to put a stopping point where it would hit 65 and it wouldn't go over. Because 65 is the speed limit. So what would a Pharisee do with the governor?
60.
Put it at 50.
They put it at 50. And why would they put it at 50?
Well, you might be going down a hill.
You might be going down a hill. You never know. And she's exactly right. Because what the Pharisee would do is they'd say, oh, well, we can set it at 65. That way you'll never know. What happens if you're going down a hill? What happens if... So someone would raise their hand and they'd say, but what happens if my wife's having a baby? And I need to go fast to the hospital. The Pharisee would say, oh, no problem. Let's make another rule. And so they'd create a mechanism in the phone app, I'm having a baby button.
My dog broke its hip button.
And this is the way it worked. It's so you come up with rules and rules. So okay, so we made the I'm having a baby button. And then so what's the next logical question after that? Some of you be having babies every day. Right? Baby. So here's how do we solve that? It's real easy. How many times can you use that button?
Once every 9 months.
Once every 9 months. And they're making all these rules.
Guys can't.
Yeah, what if there's false alarm? There you go. Well, then you got to go do this. And so you're helping me because these are actually the way people thought this process. So what happens
Sounds like
if
the way
it
we
was a
draft
false
statutes.
alarm? That wasn't the water that broke. Your wife spilled her Sprite. So what do you do? Okay?
You gotta go get it reset.
You got to go get it reset. And where would you go to get your rule app reset? Not the temple.
The
because the temple ain't got nothing to do with this. You got to go to the Pharisees.
Pharisee headquarters.
You got to go see the baby police.
PHQ.
Right? So you got all these layered rules. And what ended up happening was the app or the rule process became more important than not speeding. And not speeding got lost. And actually, what would end up happening in the baby metaphor, chosen on purpose, is what does the law say you can't do? Speed. And in our argument, what is that number?
65.
65. Pharisees found ways to keep you at 50 or give you permission to go to 67. See what I'm saying? If you're having a baby or you're dying, well, obviously God would give you the space because there's a reason why. So I'm going to give you the path to do it. You see what I'm saying? So don't work on the Sabbath. The ones Jesus uses later. We've all studied. What happens if your animal falls into a ditch?
Pull it out.
Digging it out of the ditch is by definition, according to the rule book, work. But do you want the animal to die? No, so they made a rule that enabled you to be able to take your animal out of the ditch, because that's not really work, that's saving a life. And nothing honors God quite like saving a life. The problem is, if you're just average Jacob out there, what's really hard to do? To keep up with all these rules. And so what would happen would be, you'd come to me, Pharisee, and say, Randy, what should I do? And I would quote the rule book to give you stories on how you should live. What did Jesus do different here? He didn't quote the rule book. What did he quote?
The Old Testament.
He quoted the Old Testament. He skipped the body of law, the things that they had written to jump to them.
It's like he skipped the regulations and went back to the statute.
So let's run through this real quick. First story.
I don't know those
what did
words.
Jesus
He
do
skipped
wrong?
the rules and went to the law.
He ate with sinners and tax collectors. What did he do wrong in the second one? He didn't teach his followers spiritual things to do. So not only in the first one does he hang out with the wrong people, he doesn't teach his people to do what's spiritually right. And the third one, he just out and out breaks the Ten Commandments. Okay? So here's the question on the third one. We'll spend a little more time talking about it later. We'll hold on that one. So, we gave you the three things. So now your assignment is to looking at those three things we just walked through. What do you think Mark's overall point is? Putting these three stories together. What is he trying to teach us? What does he want us to learn about Jesus? All right, take some time on Mark.
All right, clearly the Pharisees are the problem in all of these, and Jesus wasn't, so Jesus is better than the Pharisees.
He hadn't even gone to sleep yet.
You didn't sleep all night?
At 3 a.m. But I can't justify it specifically. You know that the answer is Jesus is trying to get back to the beginning.
This supersedes.
The point is to come and be a healer to the sick. The point is
The truth is being cluttered
Obscured.
by unnecessary precautions that they've put in place.
But then he made things more obscure in that middle section.
You know, something else in all of these, Jesus is basically saying, I'm God.
Do what I want.
Because
That
here
was
he's
my
saying-
first thought. I do what I want.
Because here he's saying, I have not come to call the righteous but sinners. And down here he's saying, you know, why would you eat or why would you fast in the presence of the bridegroom, indicating himself as the. And then down here he's saying, so the Son of Man. So he's indicating in all three of these who he is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at me funny.
No, I'm thinking also not good at filtering, and so I'm hearing her voice at the same time as yours.
It can be tough.
No, I'm just thinking through what you're saying.
That happened to me. I was so
He does
reactive
call
this
himself
morning. I'm like having this conversation with this one
At the
guy
very
and
bottom.
it was all here. He's just like, no, come out there. This one, he's actually getting a little more to the point.
Also on autopilot,
About being the bridegroom. This one, he's like, son of man.
I can't do two.
Shot over the head, shot at the feet, shot right at him.
No, I'm just going to shoot at you. You're not
What about your Nerf guns?
Any other thoughts?
All right, y'all are incredibly quiet, which either means this was easy or you're waiting for me to tell you the answer. Okay.
Shit.
All right, so let me hear you. What do you think? What do you think Mark's trying to do? I mean, you're smart people. Hang with me.
I think the common thread to all three of these is Jesus was challenging man-made laws that, like they have over 400 laws to teach people how to live the Ten Commandments. Jesus was trying to do away with the traditional entrapments and get back to the basics, which were two: love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. And the Ten Commandments were actually to do that. And now the Jews have, what, 400 some laws to tell you two rules. Jesus was challenging that, trying to get them back to basics.
Right. What else? Good observation.
Basically what we came up with.
I could be super off,
Okay.
but in all of these, without outright saying, well, down at the bottom he did, but he's indicating who he is.
Mm-hmm.
In the first one, he's saying, I have come, as if he's coming to be the helper, a healer, he's coming. And the second one, he is indicating himself as the bridegroom. And the third one, he's just flat out calling himself the Son of Man.
There is something very, very strong about Jesus' response. So this is one of those things that Carrie is pointing out. It's an important piece. It's the part where you already know the end of the story, so you miss the power of the story being told. Okay? So let's take the second story incident for a moment. We've identified it. Jesus wasn't teaching his disciples to do what? Fast. So why do you fast? I mean, Kathy taught on it a couple weeks ago, different people. We went through 40 days fasting. Why do you fast?
Closer to Jesus.
You want to be closer to God. Let's put it in their context for a second. Why would they fast?
Closer to God.
Closer to God. Why else? Breakthrough.
Healing.
The rules say so.
The rules say so, but also, what would fasting in and of itself by definition, you are doing what when you fast?
Skipping food.
You're not eating. Okay? Bottom line, you're not, when you fast, what do you not do? You abstain from food. So, without getting into nuances and specifics and causing more uproar, there's only one biblical definition of fasting. It's not eating food. Actually, there's a second one. It's not having sex if you're married. Basically, those two things according to Scripture. Okay? So you deny yourself food and sexuality. You're denying that. And why would you deny that? What's the point?
You spend that time getting closer to God.
Getting closer to God, but also communicating to God and others that what else?
He's more important.
He's more important. And if food gives you what?
Pleasure.
Pleasure, but also what?
Sustenance.
Energy. Let's use energy. Let's use like everyday little fifth grader words. So if you eat something, you've got, it tastes good, hopefully, and it makes you have energy to continue going. You don't eat, that you don't have those two things. So what are you saying is the source of the energy in your life?
God.
God. When I fast, what I'm saying is, He's the one who I depend on for strength, and He's the thing that brings me pleasure. Okay? This is fasting. And I'll take a break from worldly pleasure and strength to rely on his. So why does Jesus not teach his disciples to fast? Why?
Because he's with them.
He is with them. They don't have to get God's attention. They don't have to say, the one who they would be relying on is sitting in the middle of them. Can you imagine how ticked off and angry the Pharisees would have been when they heard that? Because Jesus basically says in this wineskins, new wineskins, old wineskins, he actually implies, well, your fasting doesn't need to happen anymore. Why do they not have to fast? Because they don't have to get my attention. I'm here and I am providing for them. And then they go to the next story, which is a story about what? Not just about the Sabbath.
Food?
But what?
Picking food?
They're picking up food. What is the second story about?
Not eating.
We're not eating, fasting. What's the first story about?
Eating with sinners.
Eating with sinners. Anybody catching a theme all of a sudden that you missed? This is all about eating. Right? And so, because we live in, I almost said the dirty South, but I didn't mean it the way. But you're following me. Since we don't have the same sort of spiritual components to hygiene, we don't. I watched on purpose tonight. I didn't see a single one of you wash your hands before you came in here and ate. I didn't see it. I'd say you did, but I didn't follow you in the potty because I just assumed you were doing some business. Okay? So, if you are a Muslim, you can't eat until you have ceremonially washed. Why? Because there are unclean things in the world, and you can't guarantee that one of them things didn't jump up into your fingernails. You just don't know. And you don't want to defile or sin your body by accident. Okay? So hygiene and cleanliness and food. So much so that Pharisees and Jews of the time period, some of the rules talk about which bowl you can use, which spoons you can use. So we talked a little bit a few weeks ago about the Essenes community in south and southern Israel. They pulled themselves aside and they completely withdrew because they didn't want the Romans anywhere near them. But if a bug crawls across the bowl in the cabinet, the bowl has to be destroyed. Because an unclean animal has made contact with your bowl. So there are whole areas outside the Essene community that are like little caverns that are filled with thousands and thousands of pieces of pottery. Because when you're sitting in the house and you open the cabinet and an ant goes across it. An ant. Everything in that counter now is completely unclean. Nothing can ever be used again. It must all be, it's now haram in a different language. It is now completely to be destroyed. So Jesus comes along. And he doesn't just use a dirty pot. He sits down with dirty people who are all unclean. And when they pass the potatoes are all unclean. And so Jesus comes along and says, to combine Al's comments and Carrie's comments, to sort of the overall piece with these three stories, Jesus is saying two things. It's not just, I'm challenging you. Jesus fails to meet their expectations of a spiritual leader. When I say their expectations, I mean their expectations. They expected a godly man or a man of God to do these type things. And Jesus says, your things don't get to get the category godly. At best, you can say your earthly things, your way of doing it. Secondly, Jesus takes his thumb, licks his finger, and pokes him fat in the eye. And says, I get to choose what's clean and unclean. Because I'm the only one who can make unclean clean. So when unclean touches me, we'll come back to the story later in the book, but when unclean touches me, I make it clean. It doesn't make me dirty. Secondly, my followers, they're going to do what they want, and I have to think Mark, in a level of smart aleck that I appreciate deeply, says, I'm not going to teach them how to fast, and hey boys, go pick me some stuff so we can eat. So I'm not going to fast, and I'm not going to keep the Sabbath according to your expectations. And that's the key word here. I don't want to give away the store, but what does the Ten Commandments say as it relates to the Sabbath?
Remember
Keep
the
the Sabbath
Sabbath
holy.
and keep it holy.
Keep it holy. So what does that mean? Well, we better form a rules committee to come up with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what they did. And so Jesus responds with a story about breaking their expectations. So why does Mark loop all these together, and what's the point for us? Here's the takeaway. Very carefully, we must make sure that when it comes to God's words and his commandments, that we follow his words, not other people's expectations. Now, are other people's expectations bad? Think about it for a moment. They were going to break every dish in their cabinet. Why?
To not dishonor God.
To not dishonor God. The motive is actually fairly pure, isn't it? It's fairly good, they think. And they're attempting it. So I grew up in a holiness background. Some of you have more stricter stories than mine. But, to this day, an issue in my family. My dad was an all-state athlete, played basketball in the state of Texas, blah, 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 blah. My grandmother never watched him play a single ball game, a high school basketball game in his entire career. Played in the state championship. Why? Because the wife of an Assemblies of God minister was not allowed to attend a gaming activity. And we talked about it as a family. Mama did not want to go. It wasn't that she wanted to go and she was prevented. My grandmother didn't want to go. And why wouldn't she want to do it? Because in her mind, this would be wrong. Worldly, sin, inappropriate. Now, I love my grandmother deeply. I'm grateful for her heritage in my life. But I will tell you, I told her, and I still believe, Mama was wrong. But her motive was pure. I genuinely believe that. She didn't judge anyone else for going. She didn't rail on it. It didn't make sermons. There wasn't phone calls, and we didn't have emails back then, carrier pigeons talking about people. This was her conviction, and I'll tell you, her conviction was wrong. But her motive was right. Expectations that others place on us may not always be biblically accurate, but we have to go to the motive. Hey, there's stuff that are expectations of me as your pastor that I don't necessarily think are right. I don't necessarily even agree with them. But their motives are pure, and where they're at, so I don't not only go with them, I choose to agree with them. The problem here is with Jesus is the expectations became the law instead of the expectations supporting what the law would be. And so, in the case of my grandmother, if you attend a basketball game, then you are not allowed to participate in the church. Then all of a sudden it shifts. Do you see the difference? A good example of this that plays out real fun for us in the Assemblies of God is in our 100+ year history, we started out as pacifists, which meant at one point in the history of First Assembly, if you served in the military, you were denied membership in our church. First Assembly, North Little Rock, at that time, was a pacifist, and to shoot another human being in any context was a sin. Not just our church, but all the Assemblies of God. This is what we were. This was early 1900s. This changed. Anyone going to guess when the year time frame was? The 1940s. Want to guess why?
Because Hitler went crazy?
2 eyes.
Not just because of Hitler, actually really because
Iwo Jima?
the Japanese bombed us. And stuff started changing. So much so that all the way through the late 60s, ministers were given the opportunity to make the decision, a public declaration on a credential, whether or not you should be pacifists or not. And so what I'm saying is this. We made some mistakes early when it comes to this issue. We denied military people membership. Expectation became higher than the rule. See the law. We all fall into this. And before we start throwing large rocks, or in the case of our non-pacifist today's guns at our enemies, let's be careful that we don't fall in love with our expectations more than Jesus' teachings. Because we come up with very important godly reasons and things to do. But you know whose things they are to do? Ours. And if we're not careful, we'll find ways to protect ourselves from going 65 miles an hour. And we'll also find ways to enable us to go over 65 miles an hour and feel justified in our own heart and minds. Unless you think not I, we don't want to run the list of the stuff at your table. Right? So Mark comes along and says, I'm going to give you these 3 stories that do a couple things. First, that Jesus defies spiritual expectations that have nothing to do with God. Second, he is more than willing to step out and lead and declare, I'm better than all the stuff you've come up with. Jesus isn't saying I'm better than you. He's saying, I'm better than your stuff. And third, I think Mark purposely leads us all together because over and over and over again, spiritual people are getting angry at Jesus. And who is it who kills Jesus?
Spiritual people.
It ain't the Romans. It's the spiritual people who Jesus doesn't meet their expectations.
Give us part of this.
And I have to guess that if for some reason in the history of time and eternity it turned out this way, Jesus came and hung out with us for a couple of weeks, I am terrified of what he would point out that we're doing that we shouldn't be. Because lest we think we got the corner on the market, I'm fairly confident we got some stuff. Jesus walked in and said, sushi? Are you kidding? And on that, have a great night. We'll see y'all later.
Sashimi only.
What did you say?
Sashimi only.